Hi, everyone.
Hi, Claire.
Good morning. Hi, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. This is Sarah's podcast debut. How's it going? Do you want to just tell everyone who you are and how long you've been with TCL?
Yeah, I'm a new reporter at TCL, and this is the beginning of week 4. And I've already written my first cover story, which is what we're talking about today.
So exciting. Anyone do anything interesting this weekend? Paul, you're still in Vermont, I presume?
Oh, no, I don't want to leave, but I will eventually have to. So I'm just kind of gearing up to start to go into a writing frenzy on my novel. So since they've been flooding the zone in Washington, I really haven't had a chance to do much of anything other than try to navigate the floodwaters. So, but now I'm able to sit down and actually focus, starting to.
Speaking of navigating floodwaters, it brought this image to mind of I went tubing with some of my family members this past weekend, but none of us had really proper tubes. So some of us were on like a mattress and some of us were on like inner tubes that come from a tire and then some just, regular blow up tubes. I was on the mattress and it got caught in a rough. It was so scrappy, a little trashy. The water was very brown. I don't know what was going on, but we were floating down on this mattress, I think 4 or 5 of us with like 3 children, and got caught on a rock and it just like popped and we all just kind of sank and had to like walk back. So I don't know what your flotation device of choice would be, but mine would not be a mattress after this weekend.
Well, I'm glad everybody is okay and that there's no poisoning from the brown water.
Yeah, it was like 2 feet, so...
Okay.
Well, Jacqueline is out today. She's on her way back from Peru, so we'll finally have her back next week, I believe. But the podcaster, she's coming back today, but we'll record with her next week. So I'll give the rundown, and then we can talk about the story behind the story. So last week, story 2, Sarah spoke with Robert A. Wynn about the impact of Trump's big, beautiful bill on Medicaid patients. I wrote a story about George Tidmarsh being named FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, director at FDA. Tidmarsh is an oncologist and a longtime pharma executive. Cancer policy, as always, had some important stories last week. We had NCIs dropping pay lines to the 4th percentile, and Laura Loomer's latest target, Vinay Prasad. We had a CBO report on federal health cuts and NIH's new policy on animal testing. And then finally, last week, Sarah took charge of her first lead story, as she mentioned. My understanding of kind of from the outside was reporting this story was a bit of a comedy of errors of sorts. So it sounds like Sarah did an awesome job of rolling with the punches. The cover story, it was about the official start of NCI's Vanguard feasibility trial of multi-cancer detection tests. So this was the most recent installment of Jacqueline's coverage of MCDs. This was, kind of going to be Jacqueline's baby. Then the story behind the story started about 2 weeks ago when Jacqueline was hit with a sickness while in Peru. Jacqueline told me that Paul probably has a joke about being a colonizer in there, but I'm going to roll through so you can't make that joke. Paul took on the scheduled interview for Jacqueline while she was out sick. But then Murphy's Law, Jacqueline was out again for another planned trip. So Paul ended up recruiting Sarah to help make the Vanguard happen in Jacqueline's absence. So Sarah, a little bit of trial by fire. What was the experience like? This is a story that has all of this historical context and drama and years of backstory and is really complicated just at face value. So what was that like?
I found it really fascinating. Just kind of diving headfirst into the world of early detection and really what is the forefront of early detection. The headline and really kind of the core of the story is that are MCDs going to completely revolutionize early detection? And those are kind of some of the main questions that are being wrestled by the Vanguard study, but of course it's starting with a feasibility study before it really gets into the meat and potatoes of, investigating the endpoint of mortality. But yeah, me and Paul, we talked to Philip Castle at NCI. He also spoke to Scott Ramsey at Fred Hutch, and those are 2 of the main people that are, in charge of the Vanguard study. And I think they're quite hopeful, cautiously optimistic about the outcomes of both the feasibility and then also kind of the bigger trial that could come after it.
You don't want to be too optimistic because then you lose equipoise and then you have to kill the trial. But the objective, well, there's really nothing more complicated than cancer prevention stories. And it was great to have Sara dive into it. It was almost like a battlefield commission because Jacqueline, who was going to be in charge of the story, ended up getting sick in Peru. And I'm not going to make the joke that Claire didn't want me to make, but I will make another one. Yeah. I will. Imperialism jokes are always good. Crowd pleasers. But I will quote or paraphrase Winston Churchill in saying that it's better not to know how laws and sausages are made and how news stories are written would be my paraphrase. So this one was really interesting. It was actually the interview with Scott Ramsey was going to be happening with Jacqueline, but Jacqueline was unable to do the interview. So there I was, which was wonderful to have an excuse to talk with Scott. And it also turned out to be kind of hilarious on the personal level because we started kind of veered off into talking about bicycles, and I realized how badly I wanted a gravel grinder bike. This has nothing to do with cancer prevention and early detection, I hope. So, yeah. So I ended up starting to kind of look, and when you look, you find. So I got a specialized Diverge bike, which is coming shortly to me in Stowe, and I'm looking forward to doing some riding. Because anyway, I can talk for hours about bikes, but I hope somebody will stop me.
We can make this go on and
go ahead,
on
stop
and
me.
on.
And poor Sara had to listen to this idiocy, as did the staff members at the Fred Hutch, as Scott and I were talking about bikes.
Well, I do have some questions about the actual story, but I did have another question for you, Sara. I was just wondering, I mean, I feel like every journalist has had some experience of being like kind of thrown into a story where they feel a little bit over their head and have to, just fake it till they make it. But I was wondering what your process was for when you found out you're going to be a part of this story. Where did you go? What did you do? Did you do some background research or just talk to Paul a lot, or?
Yeah, definitely background research, but I actually received a torrential downpour of audio messages from Jacqueline, not quite in the full throes of her sickness, but like towards the tail end in which she was able to articulate words. But she gave me like a very thorough rundown of this, the who, what, where, when, and why, and also the stakes and what she thinks are like the most interesting questions. So even though Jacqueline, she wasn't there for the interviews, I think I was a conduit in some ways for her, background, robust background knowledge about the topic. But yeah, I read a lot of articles and, chatted with the people at NCI, read the press releases, and yeah, just kind of on my own, thought through some of the biggest questions of, early detection. Is early detection always good, especially when we're talking about the very, very early stages in which we don't really know what's going to happen. And, as somebody who has a health reporting background, but not a lot of cancer reporting background, that was actually really surprising to me. And I think probably most people from the outside world just assume preventative early is better, but it's a lot more dicey and just nuanced than that simple narrative.
So when are you doing good, and when are you when you're doing harm? I mean, harm from prevention, which is actually incredibly timely because the word is that the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force is likely, all of the members are going to be likely to be fired by Kennedy. And also, AHRQ is getting cut. So the greatest achievement of evidence-based medicine in the United States and possibly the world is about to be dismantled. I cannot imagine how anyone is going to be able to guide the consumer through issues such as MCDs without any without the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. So it's a huge story, huge, and you walked into it, and it's you couldn't. To your point, Claire, you can't fake knowledge on this one. You either really understand the fundamentals and know what you don't know.
You die trying.
Yeah, or you ask somebody who does, and in this case, we were all working together very nicely. So,
well, we've been covering this story for a few years now. So, why is this story important? What's new here?
I mean, the trial is starting right now. This thing that has been kind of in the works for a while is starting, and it will take 3 to 4 years to really get a sense of the feasibility part of the trial, and whether or not they're going to move forward with a more robust trial or whether it's going to get rolled in. But I think it's a good time to just kind of check in with the researchers on really what are those final decisions that they made when it comes to the design of the study.
I mean, the main question is, can you even do the study? And where because here's a study that randomizes participants into 3 groups. One is one piece of one modality or another modality or a control group. Now, what happens when people on the control group decide to take another test because they're nervous? Then you lose them, and does it compromise the whole trial? And what are the risks? What do you tell people? How do you set it up? Will doctors know what the heck they're doing, because it's not a very straightforward design? And the main question is, these are trials that what happens when the technology is altered? Because this technology is rapidly changing. So that
was a really interesting part of our interviews with Philip Castle and Scott Ramsey, when you ask questions about, this is going to take a couple of years, but will the technology change by the time that we get the results of the trials? And I remember Scott Ramsey saying, like, okay, you've gotten to one of the core anxieties that I have throughout this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was before we started talking about bicycles. But yeah. No, it's really an astonishing set of questions of where technology and maybe just sort of ahead of our ability to regulate it, to deal with it, to guide consumers, and to guard from harm. I mean, harm is real. When you get a false positive or a false negative result, it's harm.
That was my next question, was what are some of the cons of MCDs? I assume false positives, over screening, over treatment, that whole deal.
Well, Sarah, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Like exactly what you said.
Okay.
The possibility of the technology not even really working as well as it's, being promised, as well as the promises are saying it will, false positives, false negatives. But then, when people do get, let's say, like a more accurate test, the impact of overtreatment. Sorry, that's not the most concise way of saying it.
I think that's actually pretty well put.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then, there's also the question of, like, is this really necessary? The vast majority of MCD tests are going to come back finding nothing. And so there's also the question of the impact on the finances and how it's going to be afforded, and, whether or not this will be covered by insurance companies, whether or not this is kind of medically necessary when the vast majority of people will get, negative tests because they don't have cancer.
And what does a negative really mean? And is it a false negative? It's interesting because it was just as an illustration of how confusing this can be. I was at a journalists, science writers meeting last year, and one of the science writers, said that she got a positive, she got a concerning mammogram, and so she took one of these tests, and it came out negative. So she was calmed by this, and that is precisely how you don't use this. That is precisely how not to. And given America's healthcare system's track record of making the worst of every invention, or if not every invention, that many inventions, this can take us straight into the wilderness. Also, how do you follow up on this? This is all very interesting territory, and I'm glad that you got into it so quickly.
Yeah, and I'll add something too to what you just said. I mean, I think the ultimate promise with people having their head in the clouds and being like, what could this ultimately mean for early detection? It's like, yeah, okay, you just give one drop of blood and then suddenly you know the answer to whether or not you have 20 to 50 different cancers. But talking to folks at VCU, folks on the ground that are going to be administering the trial and talking to patients, especially like primary care physician that I spoke to, the feeling is very much, at least in this early stages, the process is going to be MCD test and then kind of the more traditional early detection tools or just detection tools. So it would be like MCD test and then let's verify with a mammogram and then, do a biopsy. So the traditional cancer detection tools aren't going to totally become obsolete, overnight. They're going to be used in tandem.
Well, there's an argument to be made here, and it was made actually in the Cancer Letter by Peter Bach, who is, of course, part of Delphi, which makes such a test. But his suggestion was that these tests should be used only in settings, or to be used in settings where another test exists. So like colon cancer, lung cancer, and so forth. So that sort of makes sense. A test that can actually verify it. It would be nice to use it in something like pancreatic, but there is no other test in pancreatic. But that's where the need is particularly urgent. So it's a lot of scientific questions, more than you can even imagine at this point, because the trial hasn't done, which is why it's great to do the trial. To me, the most important piece of this was that NCI is still in business. It was nice to talk to Dr. Castle about the fact that here is a major clinical trial initiative that's asking a question that a lot of people find very, very important right now.
Yeah. And how does NCI feel about MCDs as this Vanguard gets going?
Well, it doesn't matter how they feel. What does matter is, it is what they feel and what they think is that. The main question is mortality endpoint, which, by the way, is often confused with survival endpoint. But that's a lecture that you both have heard enough times. But and our listeners don't need to, because they understand it too. So the main question is, does it affect mortality? Not just late stage diagnosis, but mortality. So that's the big question that solves the whole thing. But it takes years to answer, and once you take those years to answer, the technology doesn't stand in place and it moves forward. Yeah. And I
see. All right. It's so interesting, though. I have more questions, but is there anything that you feel is pressing that we should know about this?
We had a couple of questions with Ramsey and Castle about how this how the Vanguard trial compares to the NHS trial in the UK.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go into that territory.
Yeah, go.
Okay.
Go forward.
Take off.
Yeah. The NHS trial in the UK, they focused only on one test, which was the Gallery test, spike rail. Actually, the Gallery test was a contender in the Vanguard trial, but throughout the process, eventually they withdrew. And so they are not a contender any longer. And I think the main difference, I feel like I'm really going to fumble this little detail, to be honest. But the main difference is that eventually the Vanguard study is going to have the endpoint of mortality.
Which MCDs made the cut for Vanguard?
Yeah. So there are two. One's called Avitech, and it's sponsored by ClearNote Health. And then the other one is the Shield MCD test, and they are sponsored by Guardant Health.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. And we have no idea how many and which ones were considered. None of that is something that we covered. And some of it may not even be knowable. We were told that Gallery was considered and they withdrew.
Well, it's super interesting, you guys. Thanks for chatting. I learned a lot. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.